Imagine my surprise when I stumbled on a reference to Enlil in a book by Damien Eccles called Angels and Archangels. In the book, I show that Saturn, as he was called by the Romans, was known by a variety of other names going back in history to ancient times. The Akkadians and Babylonians called him Enlil, but I believe he was also the entity called Shemiyaza, the leader of the rebellion, documented very briefly in Genesis chapter 6, but more expansively in the book of 1 Enoch. That's who this entity is. He was also known as Molech.
When I began to look at the entire story of the West Memphis Three Saga, it really started to feel that there was an evil force that was wreaking havoc on everybody involved.
It has been nearly 30 years since 3 8-year-old boys were discovered naked and hogtied in West Memphis, Arkansas. 3 teenagers were charged and convicted in the deadly attack. But a decade ago, the West Memphis Three were released after entering an Alford plea. Today, one of the 3, Damien Eccles, was back in court. As WRG's Jarita Patterson reports, Eccles has gone from fighting for his freedom to fighting for his name.
My interest in this case began when a friend of mine sent me a text asking me, "What do you know about the West Memphis Three?" Now, I had no idea what or who this was, so I asked him, send me some information. So he sent me a video of a retired cold case detective breaking down the story. But I left it at that. I never thought about making a video on it, as at the time I was stuck down a few different rabbit holes. Now, I do believe God was trying to get my attention. He didn't get it on the first go around. So then something really strange happened. A few months passed by and I began to plan out some future videos and topics. So on a whim, I emailed this guy, Derek Gilbert of Skywatch TV. Now, I never even expected him to reply, as I'm really nobody. I have a YouTube channel with only a few hundred subscribers. So to my amazement, a few days after I reached out to him, there it was. His reply accepting my invitation to come on the show. Now, I had no idea what was about to happen to me. My interest in Derek was regarding his book, The Second Coming of Saturn. He makes some connections with the World Economic Forum, and that was where my interest was. So I had been looking into the World Economic Forum for a while. I was making videos about how things that they're trying to accomplish match up perfectly with Bible prophecy. So in preparation for his interview, I began listening to some other interviews he had done on his book, and I came across his interview with William Ramsey. And there it was, Damien Eccles, the de facto leader of the West Memphis Three, came up in Derek's research for his book. So it could just be coincidence, or this could be one of the most intricate threads that I have ever begun to pull on. So whether or not you're familiar with this case or not, my telling of this story will have you questioning the very nature of our reality. And I'm going to point the finger at a new suspect that you never even knew was there, but he was lurking in the shadows all along. This is a mystery of biblical proportions.
Damien Echols was one of the West Memphis Three, which is a very famous case from nearly 30 years ago now, where he and two teenage colleagues, all three were teens at the time, were arrested and convicted of the rather brutal and occultic murders of three boys in West Memphis, Arkansas.
I think his reputation really was made through these three documentaries that were put out by HBO. The first one was called Paradise Lost. And it was about the case of what became the West Memphis Three, which is a saga still going on. They're still in the news today.
The West Memphis Three saga plays out like Stranger Things Season 1. On the night of May 5th, 1993, three 8-year-old boys in West Memphis, Arkansas went missing. A few days later, unfortunately, they were found in the woods dead under very strange circumstances. Rumors started to circulate overnight that these murders were committed by devil worshippers.
I think the police were baffled about the motive of the crime. Why would somebody do this?
2 days after the boys went missing, Steve Jones, who was the juvenile officer who discovered the dead bodies, first interviewed a young man, Damien Echols. Now, Damien was already on the radar of another juvenile officer, Jerry Driver. Echols had a history of psychiatric problems. He wrote dark poems, dressed in black, had a tattoo, and was a self-proclaimed Wiccan. At one point, Damien was committed to a psychiatric hospital after trying to suck the blood from a detainee when he was locked up in a juvenile detention center. Eventually, he was released and was under the care of a social worker. In his social worker's notes, she says that he said that he could become another Ted Bundy or Charles Manson. So Jerry Driver instinctively told the West Memphis Police Department to investigate Echols. Between May 7th and May 10th, police questioned Damien 3 times, twice at his house and once at the police station. Echols did agree to take a polygraph test, and according to the administrating officer, Damien showed significant signs of deception. Police assumed that Damien had to have had help, so they started to also look into his best friend, Jason Baldwin. With no physical evidence pointing to Echols and Baldwin, the investigation might have gone in a different direction. But then enters a local waitress, Vicki Hutchinson. On her own volition, Vicki goes to the police, and she told them that she thought the killings were cult-related. And she tells them that she wanted to play detective. Now, you think that the police would tell Vicki to stay out of it, that it's a dangerous situation, that you don't want to get involved. But they say nothing of the sort, and according to Vicki, they actually encouraged her to do this. Vicki's neighbor was Jessie Miss Kelly, the third member of the West Memphis Three. Jessie mowed her lawn and even babysat for her. She claims that Jessie told her about Damien Echols, that he drank blood and was a Satanist. On the night of May 19th, only 2 weeks after the murders, Vicki says that the introduction was made. Jessie and Damon picked her up and took her to an S-Bat, which is a gathering of witches. She said that she was so offended by the activity that she asked Damien to take her home. But for some reason, it took her over a week to tell the West Memphis Police Department about this. And when she did, she took her son Aaron with her, who was telling them a very interesting story about how he was best friends with the 3 boys who were murdered, and they would often go to that same place. And one time, they even saw a group of 5 men sitting in a circle, chanting and doing what men and women do. So on June 2nd, Vicki Hutchinson took a polygraph test. And according to the administrating officer, she was telling the truth. Convinced that they had their devil-worshipping murderers, They go and pick up Jesse for questioning, and 5 hours later, he finally confesses.
I saw Damien hit this one boy real bad. And he started screwing him and stuff.
What did he hit him with?
He hit him with his fist and bruised him all up real bad. Jason turned around and hit Steve Fringe.
Okay.
He started doing the same thing. Then the other one took off. Michael Moore took off running. So I chased him and grabbed him and held him till they got there, and then I left.
But the only problem is that initially there were some inconsistencies concerning time and what the boys were tied up with. But eventually his confession matches with the known events, and the deputy prosecutor John Fogelman got search warrants for all 3 boys' houses, and they were all arrested and charged with 3 counts of capital murder. The detectives trying to strengthen their case re-interview Aaron Hutchinson again. Now his story gets even crazier and deeper. He tells them that he's the only one that knows what really happened. And now he begins to say that he was there when the murders happened. According to Aaron's account, he said he got a call from Jesse the night before, asking him to bring his friends to the woods, and he did. But Aaron says that he got away before they could kill him. But it's very concerning that Aaron didn't tell his mom or the police about this right away. You think that this little kid would be completely traumatized. But he doesn't come out and say that he was a witness to the murders until after Jesse's recorded confession was leaked to a local newspaper. It's also important to note that Vicky was in some legal and financial trouble of her own, and perhaps she was trying to earn the $35,000 reward leading to the arrest of the murderers. After all, it was her testimony that led police to question Miss Kelly and ultimately got the confession. You know how they say the devil's in the details? Every detail, every circumstance of this case gets crazier and crazier. I don't even know what to believe. Many scholars revere John Milton's Paradise Lost as one of history's greatest literary creations. This epic poem tells the story of the fall of man and the fall of Lucifer or Satan. So over the years, much has been written about the characterization of Lucifer in the story. A few poets of the Romantic period saw Satan as the hero in this story and applaud his rebellion against the tyranny of God and heaven. More recently, other writers take on that same view. For example, Saul Alinsky, the guy that wrote Rules for Radicals, the book that inspired Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, gives more than an obvious nod to this viewpoint by dedicating his book to Lucifer, the original rebel.
The definitive work on the case has been done by William Ramsey, who's written a book on this subject. Simply just reading the trial transcripts that he included in the book leads you to believe that the way Eccles and his colleagues' reputations have been cleansed over the years is the real travesty of justice. The way it's been portrayed by the media, by Hollywood, is that they were accused because they had long hair and wore black t-shirts, and that just didn't fit in with the very conservative, Christian, rural mindset of West Memphis, Arkansas.
On August 4th, 1993, the presiding judge, David Burnett, in a pre-trial hearing, ruled that Miss Kelly would be tried separate from Eccles and Baldwin. Not only that, he also ruled that all 3 would be tried as adults. Even though the state had a confession from Jesse Miskelly, the defense attempted to have that confession thrown out. They claimed that it was forced. The defense's story was that police officers played an audio recording of Aaron Hutchinson in which he said, "Nobody knows what happened but me." Then they claimed that the interrogating officers implied that Jesse would get the $35,000 reward if he confessed. But the judge wouldn't have any of it. So now it's time for the Jesse Misskelley trial to start. In late January 1994, with a jury consisting of 7 women and 5 men, John Fogelman gives his opening statement.
We expect the proof's going to show that this defendant confessed, that he was not coerced. We do not contend that the proof's going to show that every word that came out of his mouth was the truth.
Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this statement that Mr. Misskelley gave the West Memphis Police Department is a false story. The interrogation techniques that were deployed against Mr. Misskelley at the time of his statement on June the 3rd rendered him completely incapable. They broke his will. They scared him beyond all measure.
The proof is going to show that this defendant was an accomplice to Damian Eccles and Jason Baldwin in the commission of these horrifying murders, and we will ask you to return your verdict of guilty on 3 counts of capital murder.
This whole trial, this whole saga has a huge monkey wrench or wild card thrown right into it. HBO negotiated a deal with the attorneys on both sides to let a crew come in and film the court proceedings for a documentary. The directors of this film, Bruce Sinofsky and Joe Berlinger, would eventually title the film as Paradise Lost. In the years to come, they would make 2 follow-up films, all with the same name. When the directors initially began on this project, they claimed that it started off as a film chronicling the killer's trials. But early into the filming, they said it was obvious that they were innocent. But that's a little weird that they say this in hindsight, because the first film really is the only film in the Paradise Lost trilogy that's even a little bit unbiased. So the defense tried to make their case for a forced confession a little stronger by proving that Jesse Misskelley is mildly retarded.
No one's going to be saying that you're stupid or that you're dumb or making fun of you, but the court's going to be very interested in determining exactly at what level you are functioning, how well you're able to read, how well you're able to write, things of that nature. Does that make sense? Okay. So if the court determines that you are operating below average, then there's a possibility that the court will not be allowed, or the state will not be allowed, to impose the death penalty against you. Do you understand what that means?
Yeah.
We've got about 10 weeks before the trial comes up in January. Are you looking forward to having the trial?
A little bit.
Are you aware of any personality traits of people who are likely to falsely confess?
Low IQ, highly suggestible, always attempting to solve the immediate stress factor, get the interrogators off my back and just let me go home. Naively assumes that they can all straighten it out later on. It's extremely difficult for the average person to believe that someone would confess to a crime they didn't do. What I didn't like about this confession is that most of it emanated from questions right off the bat, without any narrative of any length at all, without any descriptions about feelings or conversations or anything. I just don't understand, if he was in fact involved in this crime, how he made a mistake on the time factor. And the thing that really bothers me is the ligature, what was used to tie up the victims. Now, he certainly knows the difference between shoelaces and a rope. That should have been a signal that something was radically wrong. That's when the question should have been more probing to determine whether or not he was making it up or giving a valid confession.
A part of the defense's case was that there were 2 parts of Jesse's confession that didn't match with known events. Number 1, the time. And number 2, Jesse said that the kids were tied up with rope rather than shoelaces. So as they said, he surely could tell the difference between the 2. It's just possible that he was confused. Remember, They did try to claim that his IQ was very low, he was mildly retarded. So I'm sure that he could also tell the difference between killing and not killing, whether he did it or not. So this confession is huge. So this court case went very fast, especially with his confession and the defense not being able to prove anything. Jesse received a life sentence plus 40 years. So just about a month later, Damien and Jason's trial started. Even though that Jesse was already found guilty and sentenced at this point, the prosecution could not enter into evidence his confession unless Jesse agreed to show up in person, which he would not do. In a way, it wasn't fair because everyone in the area obviously knew that he was already found guilty. So although his confession couldn't be in court, it was peripheral knowledge to everybody. So the prosecution needed to prove their case minus Miss Kelly's damning testimony. And the defense tried to create reasonable doubt by pointing the finger at anybody they could rather than Damien and Jason. So here's where things get really weird. The night that the boys were killed, a manager of a fast food restaurant that was only about a mile away from where the boys were eventually found called the police to report a man that came in who had blood all over his hands and was muddy from his shoes to his knees. Now, every part of this saga is tainted with almost a paranormal element to it.
Were you working at Bojangles Restaurant on the evening of May 5th of 1993?
Yes, sir.
Could you tell us what happened?
Well, it was about 9:30 at night. Found a black gentleman sitting in the women's restroom on the commode, and there was blood dripping off of his forearm. But he had mud on his feet, and he seemed to be disarrayed when I talked to him. I called the police then.
What happened then?
It was a female officer for the West Memphis Police Department, and she pulled on the light, and I saw her coming, so I went up to the front door. Well, she kept coming around. She went to the drive-through window.
So you did not go in the restaurant?
No, sir, I did not.
Did you ever find this bleeding black man?
No, sir, I did not.
Do you have a report that you made regarding this incident?
No, sir, I do not.
And you're out looking for some boys, and you're out in that area, and you hear about someone bleeding. Did anything go off in your mind thinking that something may be going on?
Okay, first of all, you got to understand it's a different area I went to. It was a different ward. I did not connect the two at all.
Well, Patrolman, it may have been outside your ward, but distance-wise between the area where you were looking and where this restaurant was, it's not a long distance, is it?
No, sir, it's really not.
Okay.
Did any other officer come out there that evening?
Not that evening.
Were you working on the day of May 6th of 1993?
Yes, sir. Two detectives came out and they took a report as far as what I'd seen, description of the gentleman, and then they took blood scrapings off the wall.
All right, Detective Ridge, what is the date that you sent the blood scrapings off to the crime lab to be analyzed?
They were never sent.
They were never sent?
That's correct.
All right, where are the blood samples at this time?
I don't know, sir. They're lost.
They're lost?
Yes, sir, that's my mistake. I lost a piece of evidence.
So here you have a man who is bloody, muddy, and disheveled. Then you have a cop who is already looking for the boys. Get this call. And she doesn't even connect the two. In the documentary, they really made this cop look dumb. But you need to realize something. The boys were only missing at this point, and she was more interested in finding the boys rather than tracking down this guy. It's not that crazy that she didn't make the connection. But what is crazy is the detective that took the blood scraping off the wall. He could have very well had in his possession evidence that would have exonerated the three boys. But I guess we'll never know. But things get even crazier when the defense tries to point the finger at one of the boys' fathers, John Mark Byers.
The one knife that we know somebody owns is the Byers knife. We know he owns that knife.
He's got the motive, his son who he's upset with. His son was the only one mutilated. The other two weren't mutilated. He's got knowledge about the area. He knows when the search is over with. He's big enough that he can carry the boys there and throw them in. He's a jeweler. He's precise enough to have committed that mutilation. All of the pieces fit together with somebody in a different location killing the boys in a different location, because there's no mosquito bites on them. So we know that after the boys were killed and during, they weren't outside. They had to be inside because there's no mosquito bites on them. So that means they were carried from a death scene someplace, unconscious, and brought down to the river. And they had to be killed shortly before they brought down there because they all died within a short period of time. So after they were bled to death, after they were bludgeoned and unconscious, somebody had to take those three, take them to the scene, and dump them. In order to do that, you got to be physically strong enough to carry a 50 to 60-year-old unconscious kid who's hogtied. Jason couldn't have done it. In his best day, he couldn't carry a little baby, those little skinny arms of his. So when we look at this whole thing, all the pieces that they tried to put together, none of it fits with Jason, and just about all of it fits towards a person like Byers.
When did you receive that knife?
On the, I believe it was on the 8th. I've got it's hard to make this out, January the 8th, 1994.
All right, and who did you receive this knife from?
I received it from, and how did I actually receive it?
Who did you receive the knife from?
I received it from Joe and the people with HBO Productions.
Okay. Bruce and
Joe.
Wherever he is. All right.
Yes.
Upon receiving that knife, what did you do with it?
I saw what I thought to be some type of substance on the knife, and naturally I did not know what it was. I in turn sent this knife to Genetic Design.
When the knife was received by your firm, did you or your lab run tests on that particular knife?
There was a small amount of what appeared to be blood that was dried or tissue in a crevice on the knife where the knife folds when it locks.
Mr. Byers, I need to ask you about Defense Exhibit number E6, this particular folding lock blade Kershaw knife. If I could approach the witness, Your Honor.
Yes.
Take a look at that knife, please. Had that knife ever been used before?
Used for what?
Used for any purpose?
I'd had trimmed your toenails with it. I had attempted to trim on some venison that I had.
You attempted to trim on some venison. When was it you attempted to trim on some venison?
Some time around the Thanksgiving holidays.
Do you recall being asked on January the 26th, this is on page 3, by Inspector Gitchell, had you ever taken that knife hunting or used it recently? You remember being asked that question by Inspector Gitchell?
Specifically, no, sir. He asked me a lot of questions.
All right. Do you remember giving the answer, no, that knife had not been used at all. It had just been kept up, put in my dresser, and I didn't use it, and the reason why was because of the serrated edges. Do you recall giving that answer to Inspector Gitchell on the 26th?
No, sir, I don't recall giving him that exact answer. I'm sure his question wouldn't have been asked exactly like your question was.
All right. Did Gitchell tell you, let me explain a problem we had, and you need to answer this for me. We have found blood on this knife. Did Gitchell ask you that question?
I don't remember if he said there was or not.
Did you tell Gitchell you had no idea how Chris's blood could be on that knife?
Yes, sir, I would not have any idea. If his blood was on that knife, I would not know how it got there.
Did you have any idea how human blood was on that knife?
Well, yes, I would have an idea. I cut my thumb.
All right. Isn't it true that you never told Inspector Gitchell on January 26th that you ever cut your thumb with that particular knife, did you?
Yes, sir. It seems like during the course of the day I did tell him that.
Was that during the taped conversation, or was that after?
I don't remember.
Okay. On the top of page 8, do you recall being asked the question, I have no idea how it could have any human blood on it. Do you recall giving that answer?
Yes, sir.
Then do you recall stating, I don't even remember nicking myself with it, cutting the deer meat or anything? Is that the answer you gave?
Yes, sir.
And is that the truth?
At the time when he was questioning me, I didn't I might not have remembered. We were getting ready to go into a trial.
Did you remember on this date cutting yourself with the venison or not cutting yourself?
The date that Gary questioned?
The date that Gary questioned, yes, sir.
I might not have remembered it at that time when he was questioning me, but I could have remembered it later on in the day and talked to him about it.
Okay. Earlier that afternoon, had you given Chris a whipping?
Approximately around 5:30.
So this was about 5:30, and was this with a belt?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And approximately how many times did you hit him with a belt?
I spanked him 2 or 3 times.
And what part of the body did you spank him?
It would have been just on his behind.
Okay. Was he wearing his pants, or did you have him pull his pants down?
No, he had on blue jeans.
Oh, okay.
So the defense tries to make it look like John Mark Byers gave the murder weapon to Joe Berlinger and Bruce Sinofsky, the directors making the film for HBO. Obviously, John Mark Byers is all over the place, but one thing we need to understand is he had a brain tumor at the time, and so that might account for some of his confusion. So now it's time for Damien to get on the stand. It doesn't look good for him at all. The prosecution begins to interrogate him about his interest in the occult and specifically Aleister Crowley.
You're familiar with a fellow named Aleister Crowley?
I know
Heard
who he
him?
is. I know
Okay.
who he is.
And he's a guy who kindly professes, he's a noted author in the field of satanic worship, right?
I know he is, but I've never saw any of his books personally.
Not really much of a follower of his?
I would have read them if I would have saw him, but I just
Okay.
never.
But Aleister Crowley is a guy that, based on his writings, believes in human sacrifice, doesn't he?
He also believed he was God, though. So.
Okay. And he also had writings that indicated that children were the best type of human sacrifice, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. But Aleister Crowley doesn't have any particular significance to you?
I know who he is. I've read a little bit about him, but I've never read anything by him.
Let me show you a copy of some documents. Do you recognize that?
Yes.
Okay. What is that?
It was this paper I had on different alphabets for like translations where you could write things that nobody could read, and this was one of the forms.
Oh, okay. Well, where did you have that at? When did you do that, write those things out?
Sometime before I was arrested, I guess.
Okay. Are you sure that you hadn't done those since you were arrested while you've been staying in jail?
I don't know, I might have.
Well, whose names are written on that document?
Mine, Jason's, my son's, one that says Aleister Crowley, and
Wait, who?
Aleister Crowley.
Now, this is a document that you've written while you've been waiting in jail for trial, right?
If you say so.
Well, you wrote it, correct? That's your writing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You recall when you wrote it?
Not really.
Well, what I'm going to ask you is that this Damien Seth Azariah Eccles, your son, he wasn't born until after you were placed in jail, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So if you've got his name listed on this document, then this document had to be generated after he was born, right?
Yes.
Okay. So this is something you've written since you've been sitting in here in jail waiting for trial.
Yes.
And what you were doing was writing out various names in different type alphabets, correct?
From the way it looks here, I was practicing, trying to memorize them.
Okay. And one of the names that you picked out to write about was this fellow named Alistair Crowley, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Is that just a total coincidence? You just pulled his name out of the air?
No, it's just the same book that I had with the different alphabets in it. It also had stuff about him in it.
Well, did you have the book out there at the time you were doing this?
This was just from what I remembered myself, where I was practicing, trying to memorize, get it all in my head perfect.
So you were going over it, working on it in your head, and at that point in time, you write all this down from memory?
Mm-hmm.
The people that are listed on here, you've got your name on here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then Jason Baldwin, which is your best friend, right? And then you've got Damian Seth Azariah Eccles, that's your son?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And then the only other name on this document, besides yourself, your best friend, and your son, is Alistair Crowley, correct?
Yes, sir.
This may have been what got Damien convicted. He is clearly not telling the truth. Then we have the retelling of a conversation between Eccles and Detective Ridge.
Talking to Mr. Eccles, did you ask him who did he think did it and why?
In one area, he says he had an opinion for who could have done the murders as being someone sick and that it was some type of thrill kill. He also stated that the penis was a symbol of power in his religion known as Wicca. He also stated that the number 3 has a sacred number in the belief.
And did he tell you anything about demonic forces?
Yes, sir. He said that all people have a demonic force in them and that a person would have no control over that demonic force.
Did you tell him in that statement that you had been a member of a white witch group for 5 years?
No.
Okay.
I've never been a member of any group.
And so if he put that in his report, you're saying that's inaccurate?
Yes, I am.
He made that up?
Yes, I am.
On question number 9, how do you think the person feels that did this? The answer was probably makes them feel good, gives them power. Now, I guess Officer Ridge said that too.
No, I use common sense on that.
Okay.
If someone was doing it, then they must have wanted to. And if they were doing something they wanted to, it must have made them happy. I don't think they were doing it because someone forced them to or because they didn't want to.
Okay. So in your mind, the person that killed these 3 kids, it's common sense that killing 3 8-year-olds would make you feel good?
Whoever did it, it must have.
Did you also tell him that each person had a demonic side to them?
I believe every person has a good side and a bad side, yes.
Well, were those your words when you referred, when he's got written down here, he stated that there was no control of the demonic portion of people?
He asked me, did I think there were some people that could not control that side? I said, yes, I guess there is.
It also states that Damien stated that the younger the victim would be more innocent, and in turn more power would be given the person doing the killing.
Right.
Okay. Did you say that?
Yes.
Okay, those are your words.
Mm-hmm.
Did you pick that up when you were studying to be a Catholic?
No. I saw that on several movies, books.
Question number 11, when he asked you, how do you think they died? And its answer is mutilation, cut up all 3, heard they were in the water drowning, cut up one more than the others. Is that, again, what Officer Ridge said and you just agreed?
No, I had saw that on TV, newspapers, people talking.
And you knew it about the drowning, correct?
I knew they were in the water. I didn't know that they drowned.
And you knew that one was cut up more than the others?
He asked me, was it possible? He said, do you think one was hurt worse than the others? I said, yeah, I guess.
Baldwin, Miss Kelly, and Damien Eccles were found guilty in 1994. I think it would be PR propaganda, in my opinion, of these documentaries. They started this kind of groundswell movement that raised a lot of money and public awareness in the statement that they were found innocent.
With everything that the defense tried to pull out, the jury did not buy it. They found both Eccles and Baldwin guilty of 3 counts of murder. Jason Baldwin got life in prison, and Eccles received the death penalty. But the story is just beginning.
kind of enjoy it because now, even after I die, people are going to remember me forever. They're going to talk about me for years. People in West Memphis will tell their kids stories. It'll be like, sort of like I'm the West Memphis boogeyman. Little kids will be looking under their bed before they go to bed. Damien might be under there.
Do you think that this will change at all? How you choose your friends?
Yeah.
You heard what was said about him. Do you think you could have done it?
About what they said?
Yeah, you think he could have? Do you think Damien could have killed those little boys?
They made it seem like he did.
What do you think?
I don't know.
If you were on that jury, would you have a hard time letting him go? Based on what you heard?
Yeah.
I would too. Would you let yourself go?